particular the military offensive in Rafah and the resulting repeated large-scale displacement of already extremely vulnerable Palestinian population in the Gaza Strip constitute a change in the situation within the meaning of Article 76 of the Rules of Court. The Court is also of the view that provisional measures indicated in its order of March 28, 2024, as well as those reaffirmed therein, do not fully address the consequences arising from the change in the situation previously explained, thus justifying the modification of these measures. However, in order to modify its earlier decision concerning provisional measures, the Court must still satisfy itself that the general conditions laid down in Article 41 of the Statute of the Court are met in the current situation. The Court next turns to the conditions for the indication of provisional measures. It recalls that in its orders of January 26, 2024 and March 28, 2024, it concluded that, prima facie, it had jurisdiction pursuant to Article 9 of the Genocide Convention to entertain the case. The Court sees no reason to revisit that conclusion for the purposes of deciding on the present request. In the order of January 26, 2024, the Court also found that at least some of the rights claimed by South Africa under the Genocide Convention and for which it was seeking protection were plausible, namely the right of the Palestinians in Gaza to be protected from acts of genocide and related prohibited acts mentioned in Article 3, and the right of South Africa to seek Israel's compliance with the latter's obligation under the Convention. The Court saw no reason to revisit this conclusion in its order of March 28, 2024. The Court likewise sees no reason to do so for the purposes of deciding on the present request. It further considers that, by their very nature, at least some of the provisional measures sought pursuant to the present request are aimed at preserving the rights claimed by the applicant that the Court has found to be plausible. The Court must next consider whether the current situation entails a risk of irreparable prejudice to the plausible rights claimed by South Africa and whether there is urgency. The Court recalls in this regard that it has previously concluded that in view of the fundamental values sought to be protected by the Genocide Convention, the plausible rights in question in these proceedings are of such a nature that prejudice to them is capable of causing irreparable harm. The Court recalls that on May 7, 2024, Israel began a military offensive in Rafah following weeks of intensified bombardment, and that as a result, approximately 800,000 Palestinians were displaced from Rafah as at May 18, 2024. The Court notes that senior United Nations officials have consistently underscored the immense risks associated with the military offensive in Rafah. For instance, on May 3, 2024, the spokesperson of the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs warned that an assault on Rafah would put, I quote, hundreds of thousands of people at imminent risk of death, end of quote, and would severely impact the humanitarian operation in the entire Gaza Strip, which is run primarily out of Rafah. On May 6, 2024, the United Nations Children's Fund indicated that about half of the approximately 1.2 million Palestinians sheltering in Rafah were children, and warned that military operations therein would result in, I quote, the few remaining basic services and infrastructure they need to survive being totally destroyed, end of quote. The United Nations sources indicate that the aforementioned risks have started to materialize and will intensify even further if the operation continues. For instance, on May 8, 2024, the Director General of the World Health Organization stated the Al-Najjar Hospital, one of the last remaining medical facilities in the Rafah Governorate, was no longer functional due to the ongoing hostilities in its vicinity. On May 17, 2024, the World Food Programme warned that it had been able to access its warehouses in Rafah it hadn't been able to access its warehouses in Rafah for over a week, and observed that, I quote, the incursion into Rafah is a significant setback to recent modest progress on access, end of quote. On the basis of information before it, the court is not convinced that the evacuation efforts and related measures that Israel affirms to have undertaken to enhance the security of civilians in the Gaza Strip, and in particular those recently displaced from the Rafah Governorate, are sufficient to alleviate the immense risk to which the Palestinian population is exposed as a result of the military offensive in Rafah. The court observed, for instance, that according to a statement by the Commissioner General of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East, Mr. Philippe Lazzarini, on May 18, 2024, I quote, "The areas that peoples are fleeing to now do not have safe water supplies or sanitation facilities. Al-Mawasi, as one example, is a sandy 14 square kilometer agricultural land where people are left out in the open with little to no buildings or roads. It lacks the minimal conditions to provide emergency humanitarian assistance in a safe and dignified
proudly
manner."
parade around with recognizable Nazi.
The court observed that Israel has not provided sufficient information concerning the safety of the population during the evacuation process, or the availability in Al-Mawasi area of the necessary amount of water, sanitation, food, medicine, and shelter for the 800,000 Palestinians that have evacuated thus far. Consequently, the court is of the view that Israel has not sufficiently addressed and dispelled
through the House of Lords
raised by its military offensive in Rafah. In light of the considerations set out in the preceding sections of the order, and taking account of the provisional measures indicated in its orders of January 26, 2024, not sufficiently in March 28, 2024, the court finds that the current situation arising from Israel's military offensive in Rafah entails a further risk of irreparable prejudice to the plausible rights claimed by South Africa, and that there is urgency in the sense that there exists a real and imminent risk that such prejudice will be caused before the court gives its final decision. The court concludes, on the basis of the aforementioned considerations, that the circumstances of the case require to modify its decision set out in its order of March 28, 2024. The court recalls that in accordance with Article 75, paragraph 2 of its rules, when a request for the indication of provisional measures has been made, it has the power under its statute to indicate measures that are not in whole or in part other than those requested. In the present case, having considered the terms of the provisional measures requested by South Africa and the circumstances of the case, the Court found that the measures to be indicated need not be identical to those requested. The Court considered that, in conformity with its obligations under the Genocide Convention, Israel must immediately halt its military offensive and any other action in the Rafah governorate which may inflict on the Palestinian group in Gaza conditions of life that could bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. The Court recalls that in its order of January 26, 2024, it ordered Israel inter alia to, I quote, take effective measures to prevent the destruction and ensure the preservation of evidence related to allegations of acts within the scope of Article 2 and Article 3 of the Genocide Convention, end of quote. In the present circumstances, the Court is also of the view that in order to preserve evidence related to allegations of acts falling within the scope of Article 2 and Article 3 of the Genocide Convention, Israel must take effective measures to ensure the unimpeded access to the Gaza Strip of any commission of inquiry, fact-finding mission, or other investigative body mandated by competent organs of the United Nations to investigate allegations of genocide. The Court also considers that the catastrophic situation in Gaza confirmed the need for the immediate and effective implementation of the measures indicated in its orders of January 26, 2024 and March 28, 2024, which are applicable throughout the Gaza Strip, including in Rafah. In these circumstances, the Court finds it necessary to reaffirm the measures indicated in those orders. In so doing, the Court wishes to emphasize that the measure indicated in paragraph 51(2)(a) of its order of March 28, 2024, requiring, I quote, the unhindered provision at scale by all concerned of urgently needed basic services and humanitarian assistance, end of quote, necessitates that the respondent maintain open land crossing points, and in particular the Rafah crossing. In view of the specific provisional measures it has decided to indicate, the Court considers that Israel must submit a report to the Court on all measures taken to give effect to this order within 1 month from the date of this order. The report so provided will then be communicated to South Africa, which shall be given the opportunity to submit to the Court its comments thereon. The Court recalls that its orders on provisional measures under Article 41 of the statute have binding effect and thus create international legal obligations for any party to whom the provisional measures are addressed. The Court underlined that the present order is without prejudice to any findings concerning the respondent's compliance with the orders of January 26, 2024 and March 28, 2024. In its orders of January 26, 2024 and March 28, 2024, the Court expressed its grave concern over the fate of the hostages abducted during the attacks in Israel on October 7, 2023, and held since then by Hamas and other armed groups, and called for their immediate and unconditional release. The Court finds it deeply troubling that many of these hostages remain in captivity and reiterates its call for their immediate and unconditional release. I shall now read out the operative part of the order. For these reasons, the Court, by 13 votes to 2, reaffirms the provisional measures indicated in its orders of 26 January 2024 and March 28, 2024, which should be immediately and effectively implemented. In favor, President Salam, Judges Abraham, Yusuf, Shway, Bandari, Iwasawa, Nolte, Charlesworth, Brandt, Gomez Robledo, Cleveland, Oresco, Tladi. Against, Vice President Sebutinde, Judge ad hoc Barak. 2. Indicates the following provisional measures. The State of Israel shall, in conformity with its obligations under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, and in view of the worsening conditions of life faced by civilians in the Rafah Governorate, A, by 13 votes to 2, immediately halt its military offensive and any other action in the Rafah Governorate which may inflict on the Palestinian group in Gaza conditions of life that would bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. In favor, President Salam, Judges Abraham, Yusuf, Shway, Bandari, Iwasawa, Nolte, Charlesworth, Brandt, Gomez Robledo, Cleveland, Oresco, Tladi. Against, Vice President Sebutinde, Judge ad hoc Barak. By 13 votes to 2, maintain open the Rafah crossing for unhindered provision at scale of urgently needed basic services and humanitarian assistance. In favor, President Salam, Judges Abraham, Yusuf, Shway, Bandari, Iwasawa, Nolte, Charlesworth, Brandt, Gomez Robledo, Cleveland, Oresco, Tladi. Against, Vice President Sebutinde, Judge ad hoc Barak. C, by 13 votes to 2, take effective measures to ensure the unimpeded access to the Gaza Strip of any commission of inquiry, fact-finding mission, or other investigative body mandated by competent organs of the United Nations to investigate allegations of genocide. In favor, President Salam, Judges Abraham, Yusuf, Shway, Bandari, Iwasawa, Nolte, Charlesworth, Brandt, Gomez Robledo, Cleveland, Oresco, Tladi. Against, Vice President Sebutinde, Judge ad hoc Barak. 3, by 13 votes to 2, decides that the State of Israel shall submit a report to the court on all measures taken to give effect to this order within 1 month as from the date of this order. In favor, President Salam, Judges Abraham, Yusuf, Shway, Bandari, Iwasawa, Nolte, Charlesworth, Brandt, Gomez Robledo, Cleveland, Oresco, Tladi. Against, Vice President Sebutinde, Judge ad hoc Barak. I shall now call on the registrar to read the operative part of the order in French.
Par ces motifs, la Cour, 1, par 13 voix contre 2, réaffirme les mesures conservatoires indiquées dans ses ordonnances des 26 janvier et 28 mars 2024 qui doivent être immédiatement.
So there we are. We have heard the ruling from the International Court of Justice, the UN's World Court, by 13 to 2. The court has ordered Israel to halt its Rafah military offensive. It's ordered Israel to open the Rafah border crossing for humanitarian assistance. It has said that Israel has to take measures to ensure unimpeded access into Gaza for investigators into claims of genocide. And it has said that the current situation in Gaza and Rafah entails further risks to the irreparable damage to the rights of the people of Gaza. And it also said that the situation in Gaza has deteriorated. It is now disastrous, and it's not convinced that the evacuation of Rafah and other measures taken by Israel are enough to alleviate the suffering of the Palestinians. So that is the ruling by 13-2, delivered there by Judge Nawaf Salam. And let's go back to our correspondent who's inside the palace where the court is at The Hague, Anna Holligan. Anna, just give us your sense of this ruling and what it means.
It goes a lot further than many people were expecting here. You can see the people milling around behind me. I'm in a room just underneath the Great Hall of Justice where the presiding judge, Nawaf Salam, was reading out that provisional measures ruling. You can see on the screen behind me here, he is still going through details in French. So just to take some of the heat out of this and go through exactly what the UN's highest court has ordered here. I've just been handed a summary of the ruling and made some notes. Israel must immediately halt its military offensive and any other acts that could result in conditions of life that may bring about the physical destruction in whole or part of the Palestinian people in Gaza. Israel must maintain and open the Rafah border crossing for unhindered provision at scale of essential services and humanitarian assistance. Israel must take effective measures to ensure unimpeded access for any fact-finding mission or investigators mandated by the UN to investigate allegations of genocide. And Israel must report back to this court, the International Court of Justice, within 1 month on how it is implementing this provisional measures order. Ben, you alluded to it there. There was a real indictment from the judges, and we should say on most of these provisional measures orders, the judges voted 13-2. So the ad hoc judge, the Israeli ad hoc judge, and one other were the only two which raised dissenting opinions to these decisions. But the real concern among the panel of international judges here is the fact that they are not convinced, they said, that the evacuation efforts and related measures that Israel affirms to have undertaken to enhance the security of civilians in the Gaza Strip, and in particular those recently displaced from Rafah, are sufficient to alleviate the immense risk to which the Palestinian population is exposed as a result of the military operation in Rafah. So the hearing is coming to an end now. Just to remind you, the International Court of Justice's rulings are binding, but it doesn't have any enforcement mechanism. So it's up to states, to member states, including Israel, to comply. And just at the end of the hearing there, we should mention the judges also called for all of the remaining hostages taken by Hamas on October the 7th to be released.
And Anna, just from what the president of the court was saying, 13 votes to 2, this was a pretty overwhelming decision. This wasn't a narrow majority, it was a big majority.
Absolutely, and all bar 2 voting in favour. It reflects a shift because we knew already around half of these judges were in favour of calling a ceasefire, and just in the last couple of weeks since South Africa has returned to the court stating that the existing provisional measures weren't being followed, and therefore, as the judges have just said, there is a need for a modification of those existing provisional measures, emergency injunctions ordered by this court. That is the majority of judges agreeing that this is now necessary to stop the situation from deteriorating further. And just to go back to why we're here in the first place, South Africa brought this case to the International Court of Justice, accusing Israel of violating the Genocide Convention.
Now, they are some big-ass glasses.
To protection under that convention were at risk of being subjected to irreparable harm. This is not a ruling on the wider merits of that case, so the overall case brought by South Africa. This is a decision on the provisional measures, the need for
Council, but in particular, the pressure is on the United States.
Absolutely.
We saw the outrage in the US earlier this week when the International Criminal Court, that's a separate court in The Hague, came up with recommendations from the prosecutor, which then have to go to.
Miss Kips means nothing. It's a stupid name that I put on a YouTube account to watch over 18 content. How many years ago now? About 20. Easy 20 years ago. And I'd watched a film where a guy had made a joke, a shitty one at that. My name's Kip, conceived in prison, motherfucker. And then I was trying to think of a stupid name, and it's just kind of followed me around. So that was like over 20 years ago, and then like 15 odd years ago or whatever, I started doing YouTube, and that name still existed, and that's it.
Judges that Prime Minister Netanyahu and
Sunak
Defence Minister
calling
Gallant
for snap
should
elections.
face arrest warrants for crimes
Alright,
against
aye mate, I get you,
humanity
right, I get you
and
now,
war
bud.
crimes,
I thought he'd done a run of the day, man. I thought he's fucking
It's
on the
harder for
boat with
United
fucking some
Council.
brown
This
cunts
is the
back to Europe or
International Court of
something.
Justice. All member states must abide by this, and
Yes.
the US is saying the same thing as this court. The US for weeks has been saying the Rafah crossing must be open and there shouldn't be a Rafah offensive. The US doesn't disagree with this. So when someone brings this up in the Security Council, and I have no doubt that this will be the basis now of a resolution towards the Security Council, probably Algeria, they're the current Arab member of the Security Council. How is the US going to veto that?
When do you expect this to come up in front of the UN
we're
Security
in
Council?
trouble.
We'll have to ask our colleagues in New York. There's actually an
ICJ came along and they burst Israel's bubble. Oh, they're in trouble. The ICJ came along and burst Israel's bubble.
Obeying it and how to strengthen it.
That's a good song.
So Ambassador's going to be meeting shortly.
See the fucking songs you can remember from back in the day, you don't even
you
realise
could
it.
come up with a Security Council resolution that is literally a few paragraphs long, because it simply could say the Security Council demands that Israel abide by the provisional measures put in place by the International Court of Justice. I suspect, though, the way the Security Council works, and I've spent a lot of time
they're
in New
in
York
trouble.
following their deliberations,
ICJ came along and burst their bubble.
But it puts, I think, the Biden administration in a very difficult position, and it puts Israel in, I think, one of the most difficult weeks it's had, both diplomatically and legally, because we've had that ICC...
Right, okay, let's hear a cover-up from the Sky. Oh, we'll get this guy. It's another cokehead on TV. I'm rich English Dr. New York, but the Jerusalem I cannot breathe through my nose. Hey, this is the live shit, so it's going to be a bit dodgy trying to go back, but I should be able to crack it. Just to get the fallout. Oh, work with me, work. Right, here we go.
On Israel halting its offensive in Rafah. Let's get more on this with our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle. And Alistair, considerably...
Bunkle? Hello, Bunkle!
The status of what's going on
he was called
inside
Bunky
Gaza. And notably, it said that the situation in Gaza has worsened, it's deteriorated since the last ruling, and that it's now considered disastrous, and that is why they've made this decision today.
Yeah, it was a pretty damning indictment of the situation in Gaza now, a situation that the
just
court
had a few wee perkers
is the
coming
responsibility
on.
of Israel
As do.
and the Israeli military actions in Gaza, particularly in the city of Rafah in the south. And so it was asked to deliver emergency measures by South Africa. The expectation here in Israel
I'm going to make
is
a
that they
big
would
bacon
decide this time
sandwich,
to
man.
deliver
Bacon
some
and black
measures
pudding
demanding an end to
sandwich.
part of the Israeli military offensive, and that is what has happened. The court could have
brown sauce and cheese.
Ordered that Israel cease its military operations in Gaza completely. They decided not to do that. Instead, saying that they must immediately stop the operations in Rafah. And in some respects,
kill the
that
rest of them,
was,
just not in Rafah,
not
please.
What Israel wanted. Israel, from people I was speaking to, would almost have preferred, actually, the court to go all the way and order an entire halt to all operations. The reason being is that this court doesn't have any enforcement powers. And so the next stage we would expect is that this would go in front of the UN Security Council. Now, if the UN Security Council had been presented with a decision, an order to stop the Gaza offensive in its entirety, I think there would have been a far greater likelihood, and Israeli officials believe there'd be far greater likelihood that the US would get Israel's back and veto that.
Veto it, right?
However,
it's a watered down piece of shite. Then
stop the offensive in Rafah. Perhaps the United States won't veto it. They might abstain. They might even vote in favour. But it puts Israel potentially in a more tricky position.
You think?
And then Israel has to decide what it
Blow
wants
your
to
nose.
do and whether or not it's going to obey the orders of the court. They have already indicated very strongly that they won't.
They won't.
The Israeli government spokesman yesterday said that no power.
You never have before. Why would they start now?
Stop Israel. If it decides to ignore the power and carry on with fighting both in Gaza but specifically in Rafah, then it would be doing something similar to what Vladimir Putin did over the last couple of years in Ukraine, when the court also, in that case, ordered that Russian forces stop fighting in Ukraine. Well, Putin.
You've got Sky News comparing that nut job to Putin.
Suggest that Netanyahu and Putin are acting in a similar manner and in similar defiance of the World Court. Is that a reputation that Netanyahu wants, particularly given the week we've just been through, when the International Criminal Court, that's another international body, has sought arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant.
My head gets pickled with all these
wrapped into that
international gladiators.
Is if you look back at that March 2022, I think, ICJ ruling on Russia and Ukraine, the Americans, the White House, and at the time, the President, Joe Biden, was very supportive of the court in that instance. Can they really find themselves now, 2 years later, objecting to the court and trying to undermine it? It's going to put the White House in a very difficult position as well.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Alistair, isn't it, about this tightrope that the US is straddling right now, because, of course, it was the United States that told Benjamin Netanyahu not to go into Rafah, and Benjamin Netanyahu told the public in Israel in an address that he will do it alone, go with or without the US. So, as you say, this may change things, because the ICJ ruling is not about Gaza in its entirety. It is about Rafah specifically. So all eyes now, presumably, on how the US
nut job. If you destroy it all,
the US
you won't need any love bombs and bullets.
They oppose an Israeli
we don't want victory. We want perpetual warfare for our cause.
The fact that you had around 1.4, 1.5 million Gazan civilians seeking refuge there, and it could create a humanitarian crisis and deepen the situation that Gaza's already suffering from. So the Americans were very clear. They did not support a Rafah offensive. The Israelis went ahead with it anyway, but whether or not they changed their mind because of US pressure, we don't know, but they've certainly gone about it in a far slower manner, coming in from the east initially and just carrying out more specific counter-terror raids, they would say, as opposed to a sort of a mass land invasion of the city of Rafah, similar to what we saw in Khan Yunis and in Gaza City. So perhaps the Americans did have an influence on them there, and it has been suggested in the last couple of days that the Americans are more content with the way the Israelis are going about the offensive in Rafah. I'm not sure that's coming from the Americans, incidentally, but that is the sort of the rumour that the Americans are a bit more satisfied about the way it is playing out. Nevertheless, because the Americans have always been pretty robustly against any Rafah operation, it might be that they decide not to get Israel's back on this one in the Security Council if and when it comes to that floor.
And Alistair, of course, reporting from inside Israel, you're watching, seeing, speaking to politicians there,
what they're
seeing
saying
how
is
the media is covering all of this.
US
Israel's told
might
the top court, the ICJ for the UN, that a case brought by South Africa
Security
about its
Council,
military
the real
operation in
players.
Gaza as a whole makes a mockery of the heinous charge of genocide. I don't know if you've had a chance, Ali, to see any kind of response today to this ruling, or how you think Israel might respond. That, as you said, if they don't listen to it, it kind of puts Netanyahu on par with Putin.
It's his Sky News as well.
The judge delivering the order and then coming on air, but I could anticipate that it will be met by the Israeli government. They'll be pretty scathing about it. I mean, we've already sort of seen them set the ground for that over the last couple of days. They will completely refute any suggestion that is made by the South Africans that they're carrying out genocide inside Gaza. I think the Israeli lawyer at the International Court of Justice in proceedings over the last few days, few weeks has said, yes, it is war, it is very nasty, but it is not genocide. And he said to the South Africans, you can keep repeating the accusation it's genocide over and over again. It doesn't mean the more you say it, the more likely that it is. So the Israelis completely reject the idea that they are committing genocide. And actually Joe Biden agreed with them and said so over the last couple of days as well. If they don't abide with the court, then yes, of course, they are potentially making their lives much, much harder into the future. And as we've seen this week, as I said, the International Criminal Court, and that's the court that goes after individuals, the International Court of Justice, who we've just heard from, they go after nation states. The International Criminal Court has requested arrest warrants against Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, as well as 3 Hamas leaders. So that's happened this week. You've had 3 European countries in Spain, Ireland and Norway decide to formally recognise a Palestinian state. There is a thought that more European countries might follow. You've then...
Okay, now let's see if BBC go balls out and talk about
South Africa argued
comparing
an urgent intervention
job
by the court to ensure that there is no further deterioration to the situation in Gaza, and to ensure that after the conflict is over, there is an opportunity, a chance to rebuild Palestinian life in the Gaza Strip. So just to remind you again of those measures ordered by the court here in The Hague, Israel must immediately halt its military offensive and any other acts designed or at risk of bringing about conditions of life that could result in the physical destruction in whole or part of Palestinians in Gaza. Israel must maintain the Rafah border crossing open for the provision at scale of essential services and humanitarian assistance. Israel must take effective measures to ensure unimpeded access to any fact-finding mission or investigators mandated by the UN to investigate allegations of genocide. And Israel must report back to the ICJ, the UN's highest court, within 1 month to say how these provisional measures orders are being implemented. That's the situation here in The Hague. The judge's order, you can see some of the camera people milling out behind. We're expecting probably a statement from the South African delegation later on today at some point.
Okay, Anna, thank you very much indeed for all of that comprehensive analysis of that judgment from the World Court. And let's go straight to Jerusalem, because we can talk to our diplomatic correspondent Paul Adams, who is there for us. Paul, I don't know if there's been any reaction yet from the Israeli government, but the decision from the court is pretty overwhelming, pretty decisive by 13 votes to 2, demanding an end to the Rafah offensive and also telling Israel, you know, a whole string of things it has to do.
Yeah, reaffirming the measures that it issued earlier this year and adding that crucial one for the first time, calling on Israel to halt that Rafah offensive. This was the measure that was anticipated with some debate as to whether or not the court would finally take that additional step. No official reaction from the government so far. It's due to discuss this ruling later today. There is a reaction from the hardline finance minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who has called it irrelevant and he's dismissed the court as anti-Semitic. These are the sorts of remarks you would expect to hear from some of Mr. Netanyahu's more hardline colleagues. But when it comes to the order to halt the Rafah offensive, I think we can expect a big fat no from the government here. And I think they will probably complain that the court, in coming to its conclusions, only cited what the UN had told them about the situation in southern Gaza. The Israelis have been arguing for some time that they are taking steps, notwithstanding their military operation in Gaza, that they are taking steps to improve the provision of food and goods into the Gaza Strip. It's very noticeable, for example, that for the 3 weeks or so after May the 7th,
anybody that was watching the politics earlier would have seen the Israeli spokesman guy come on and talking about the aid and everything that was going in, so it was a kind of preempting
and this was something
what they knew was probably in the pipeline.
Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of trucks of commercial foodstuffs have gone in through that very same route, allowed in by Israel, escorted by armed guards inside the Gaza Strip, and taken into the marketplace in Gaza. There is food to be had in places. A lot of Gazans can't afford it, but that was an element of Israel's response to the situation in Gaza that the court simply didn't allude to. They also obviously did not allude to Israel's military rationale for attacking Gaza, the complete dismantling of the last remaining battalions of Hamas, and the importance, Israel would say, of securing the border between Gaza and Egypt to prevent the smuggling of weapons, which could lead to a future conflict. Now, all of this was not referred to by the court. The court obviously feels that of in excess of 800,000 people, we think it's probably closer to 1 million by now, it is evidence of the increased risk to life and well-being.
Seems to be the BBC are going in a wee bit
of the Palestinian
less
population of the Gaza Strip, and that was enough
on this, on Israel on this. Whereas Sky, whereas BBC seem to be more defensive.
Okay, Paul, much more on this to come. Paul Adams there, just to reiterate, the World Court, the International Court of Justice, the UN's top court, has ordered Israel to halt its Rafah military offensive. You are watching BBC News.
Hello, I'm Geeta Gurumuthy, bringing you continuing coverage from the BBC here in the UK. Of course, a very, very busy day. We'll be updating you on the UK election coverage in the coming hours. And of course, keeping you across events from the ICJ on Israel with that new ruling from faulty Horizon IT system.
Back to more light bulb distractions.
Had the ICJ deliver this ruling now, and that is what led, all of that added up in the space of just a few days, has led Jake Sullivan, the US National Security Advisor, I think last night, to express real concern that Israel has become increasingly isolated on the world stage. Some of its more traditional allies are now taking a different path. And as Jake Sullivan said, you know, that could be detrimental to Israel's security. So I'm sure the Americans will be talking quite frankly to the Israelis and saying, you know, in some respects, it doesn't matter whether you agree with it or not. You have to look at the direction that many countries around the world are now taking. As I said, some of those countries who had historically been allies of Israel, they're now starting to take a different course of action, and maybe now it is time that Israel pays attention to that. But I have to say, throughout the last 7.5 to 8 months, Benjamin Netanyahu has, broadly speaking, not been in any mood to really deviate from the course he and the War Cabinet are setting, regardless of international pressure.
Okay, Alistair Bunkle live from Jerusalem shortly after that ICJ ruling. Thanks very much indeed. And just to remind you that we've just had that ICJ ruling calling on Israel to halt its Rafah military offensive. The ICJ president said that the humanitarian situation in Rafah is now classified as disastrous and has deteriorated further since the last order. It noted that provisional measures taken by Israel do not fully address the consequences from the changed situation, and therefore it has ruled that Israel should halt its Rafah military offensive, that Israel must take measures to ensure unimpeded access to investigators. It's also called on Israel to open and maintain unhindered access to the Rafah crossing, and for immediate and effective measures to implement all previous rulings, including the unhindered provision at scale of aid. And I must also remind you that the ICJ has also ruled once again and reminded Hamas of the call and the ruling to return the hostages. Of course, today we've had that sad news that 3 hostages' bodies have been retrieved from Gaza. We'll keep you up to date on any reaction to that.
That also
and when we get
lessens the blow as well, I suppose, doesn't it?
Let's take you back live to central London and the Post Office inquiry, where we are now hearing from former Chief Executive of the Post Office, Paula Bennell, giving evidence for the 3rd consecutive day.
This is a strange thing. And definitely your sunglasses more in front of the computer.
It was crass and insensitive, wasn't it?
It was.
Than
Absolutely.
Outdoors. Funnily enough.
Did you speak to Mr. Davis about it?
Yes, I did.
There's the UK back to whitewash. I don't think Al Jazeera will be that
The Prime
forgiving.
Minister and the Defence Minister should face arrest warrants. We've had this very, very strong ruling by the International Court of Justice, and we've had fresh momentum in the recognition of the Palestinian state by 3 key European countries.
And when you look at the orders, and Judge Salam went through who's in favour and who's against, it breaks down as previous orders that we've seen from the International Court of Justice, with 13 in favour, 2 against, the 2 being the ad hoc Israeli judge and the Ugandan judge. How much does this once again highlight what the world wants to see happen, and how isolated Israel and the United States are on this?
Absolutely. Yes, it's worth telling you who that
Anybody's not familiar with film
Court
Spaceballs, go and watch it.
in judge.
Oh, God almighty, man. I've turned the dead bodies and I ain't fucking no playing a drinking game on this one.
Author
I
of
need
much for
about
your
10
time,
bottles
Mr.
of
Brody.
vodka.
Your reaction, firstly, to the court's ruling and what you've heard?
Well, I think this is just huge. The ICJ has really
That's what she said.
To confront the reality of the
Too easy.
escalation in the Gaza Strip. I mean, these are very specific orders. Stop the offensive in Rafah, open the Rafah border crossing, allow in fact-finding missions. There's not a lot of wiggle room here. I'm really impressed, well, first of all, by South Africa's tenacity and perseverance in coming back to the court, in holding their feet to the fire, in saying this is not
There's
enough.
millions
This is
come
no
to
longer
see
good.
them.
And
They
the court
stand
has
and gaze
responded,
at all
and
they
responded
remember.
almost unanimously, including all of the Western judges.
24-5, 24.
Who have
Israelis
been as radical as reality. I mean, South Africa has been asking
Israelis
since day
at
one
the court
for an order for Israel to stop its military offensive. the court has always said, well, you know, we can't do that because because Hamas, because Palestine is not before this court. We cannot only order one side to stand down. And that's what they have finally chosen to do here. And it's a testament to this court. It's a testament to South Africa. And it does, I think, together with the decision by the ICC prosecutor earlier this week, it is a real 1-2 legal punch.
That's really interesting. Of course, the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice are separate, but can they influence what the other is doing?
Oh, I have no doubt. I don't know how much this court has been influenced by the ICC, but I do feel like the ICC has been, the prosecutor has been influenced. I mean, we have, you know, the question of Palestine has been on the desk of 3 successive ICC prosecutors for 15 years, and no one wanted to really bite the bullet and do something. Even this prosecutor who came in, there was a lot of speculation. I was with him at the ICC assembly in December. I've seen his body, his rhetoric, and many people felt he would not do anything, that this was a red line. I mean, the political constellation at the ICC and the ICJ is different. And it was always assumed that there was a red line that the prosecutor of the ICC would not cross, and that was indicting an Israeli official. And I think it's the continued onslaught by Israel, the international consensus around the criminality of Israel's activity, but also this case before the other court, before the ICJ, in which the ICJ has been saying that South Africa essentially has a case to answer, that Israel has a case to answer on genocide, that made it untenable for the ICC prosecutor not to act.
Mr. Brody, do you think that that continuing onslaught by Israel that you mentioned, that the latest orders by the International Court of Justice can have an impact? Because since the International Court of Justice ordered the first set of provisional measures in January, Israel has killed more than 15,000 civilians in Gaza. So does the latest ruling put more pressure on Israel? And more importantly, does it put more pressure on the United States?
I think that's what it does. I mean, Israel has not been impressed with anything that the ICJ judges have done yet. But I think it's to the rest of the world who now have in front of them very specific. This is not a question of are you behaving, are you not behaving, are you complying? I mean, the first ruling was comply with the Genocide Convention. Allow humanitarian aid. The second ruling was stronger, ensure humanitarian things. But this is very specific. You are or you are not stopping your military offensive. You are or you are not opening the Rafah crossing. You are or are not allowing in fact-finding missions and the like. And I think that this puts, obviously, the United States in a very, very difficult position. The U.S. judge voted for these measures. All the U.S. judges, I mean, again, these judges are elected in their personal capacity. They're among the most distinguished jurists in the world. But it is indicative that all of the Western judges voted for these measures.
Mr. Brody, I want to go back to one point that you made at the beginning of the interview where you said that the orders are so clear they leave no wiggle room. But I do want to speak to you, ask you, because you are a war crimes prosecutor, you have so much experience about the wording of the most important order, which is that Israel has to immediately halt its military offensive, any other action which may inflict on the Palestinian group in Gaza conditions of life that could bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Could Israel argue that its operations in Gaza don't bring about the destruction of the Palestinian people?
You know, I actually haven't seen where the commas, to be honest, I haven't seen where the commas are in that sentence. And what does stop, immediately halt its military offensive in the Rafah governorate and other actions which may create these conditions. And I don't know whether that which create these conditions modifies all your military actions or other actions. So I don't want to answer that without seeing where the commas are in that sentence.
Okay, Mr. Brody, we will be speaking to you over the next few hours, so we'll give you time to get your head around the exact wording of that. For now, that is War Crimes Prosecutor Reid Brody. Thank you. Now let's get more on this with Hind El Khudri in Deir al-Balah in central Gaza. Hind, has there been any reaction yet to this very significant orders from the International Court of Justice, especially pertaining to Rafah and the situation in Rafah?
Or should I say hot, because the sun's out?
Well, unfortunately, there is no reaction because most of the people here where I am right now do not have any connection to the internet or to any cause. Only journalists are well aware of what's happening. Again, people here in the Gaza Strip are currently striving to feed themselves, to find clean water to drink, to find a spot to live after the continuous displacement. So people are not very well aware of what's going on. They're asking journalists and they're knocking our doors and asking us if there's anything positive, but actually we're
people
waiting
that are
a little
late to the
bit to
party,
see
if
what
you still want to watch
is going to turn
the
out. We really don't want to tell
ruling
people
itself,
news
caught
and
most of it
to
on
give them
this
hope
stream.
because we have been witnessing a couple of times where we told them positive news, but it turned out like, no, it's not. So we're waiting a little bit to tell people. The situation in Rafah is very intense. There has been carpet bombing for a couple of residential areas in Al-Shabuda.
What did carpets do?
In the central Rafah. According to our
What
sources,
the IDF got against carpets?
To the Kuwaiti hospital, but again,
Bombing all
Al-Kuwaiti
those
hospital is a
carpets.
very small medical point.
Bombing,
They do not have ICUs. They do not have. They only have a couple of beds, and they do not have a lot of doctors because most of the doctors were evacuated to the middle area. So the situation is still escalating. The Israeli tanks are expanding.
It's Celtic fans gathering around Parkhead for a wee pre-cup final.
In Rafah, our sources are telling us that airstrikes did not stop, artillery shelling did not stop, and we're also talking about 800,000 Palestinians that evacuated from Rafah to the middle area and to Khan Yunis in the past couple of weeks when the Israeli forces ordered Palestinians to evacuate. But there are at least 3.
Right. Not to dismiss it or anything, but so I'm going to go back 10 minutes, man.
Edging towards its densely populated western front. That comes despite international calls for a stop to the invasion. Israel's killed over 35,800 Palestinians since early October.
Arabia, and we can do friendship and we can live together, and we have no aim to attack Gulf states or Saudi Arabia or.
Jesus, they're still on that ticket. So, what are RP saying? Is that live and just not the stream?
Presence.
Also, in the context of the revelations recently that our own editor-in-chief Margarita Simonian revealed, German officers talking about how they were going to facilitate and provide weapons and intelligence to strike the Kerch Bridge in Crimea. We know that Ukraine has absolutely no satellite systems. It doesn't know how to target these weapons. It doesn't have any Storm Shadow missiles.
And we are determined to beat as many conservative MPs as we possibly can.
Across the
Ed Davey there of the Liberal Democrats. Well, let's speak to our political correspondent Nick Eardley. Nick, everyone's been sprung into action.
The more I
this
think
week.
about
the Tories,
it,
of course,
the more calling this election early is to just distract us all about this fucking cock and pony. Nobody believes in politics. Maybe this is going to be the great reset, this election, when nobody turns up. We're back to post office and politics. shouldn't be called the news, it should be called Post Office and Politics. General election. The Germans are not talking about it yet. Check the Germans out first. Let's see if their live stream will allow me to do this. Go back to 13 seconds.
Swastika starts May 25th on D.
You countdown 10, but boop, boop, boop. Back in the room.
This is DW News live from Berlin. The International Court of Justice orders Israel to stop its military offensive in Rafah immediately. The top UN court says the humanitarian situation in Rafah has worsened drastically in recent weeks and that Israel must open the city's border crossing for aid deliveries. It is unlikely that Israel will comply. Also coming up, a massive landslide kills scores of people in Papua New Guinea.
Right.
On this in The Hague has just ordered Israel to immediately stop its military offensive in the southern Gaza city of Rafah. The top United Nations court called the humanitarian situation there disastrous and ordered Israel to allow unhindered access to aid. Israel has repeatedly said that it has the right to defend itself from Hamas militants, and it is unlikely to comply with this ruling. The court also ordered Israel to report its progress in applying the measures within 1 month. The ruling was in response to a South African request at the court. Now, the court, of course, has no way to enforce its decision, but the case adds further international pressure on the Israeli government.
The court observes that the concern that it expressed in its decision communicated to the parties on February 16, 2024, with respect to the developments in Rafah have materialized, and that the humanitarian situation is now to be characterized as disastrous.
I'm joined now by Michael Becker. He's Assistant Professor of International Human Rights Law at Trinity College in Dublin. He is also a former legal advisor at the International Court of Justice. It's good to...
So, covered most of it live earlier and now getting the roundups. I believe this is the last. Need to go and start cleaning this feckin' place,
Hello
man.
and welcome to Talking Europe. Now, voters under 30 account for roughly a sixth of Europe's electorate. That's an important group for political
When you
parties
see
to
him
win
going
over
like that,
in
now that's
this
a genuine
EU
bona
election.
fide
Young
home over
people,
of the
though,
footballers.
are
from
less
the
likely
60s.
to take part in European elections than older generations.
Nope, they're not touching on it at all. Lord Frost claims they're no talking about it. What the fuck is this? Who is that? Why is he so small? That's no good. It looks like a wee small kid. Is that a wee small kid?
It is now my pleasure to introduce our 78th Secretary of the Navy, the Honorable
Sounds
Carlos
like a little
Del
kid.
Toro.
Anywho.
Good morning, everyone.
There we have it, man. So the cogs... the cogs are turning. Things are changing and there's a lot of pressure getting put on Israel by the international community. If you want to see some of the ruling live, when they're taking the votes and stuff, go to the start of this stream. And hey, who knows what will happen tonight or later on. And sub up, bell up, tell your friends, family, foes, help the channel and the shows grow. And I might do something tonight if he's about and fancy it. If I'm about, get it, got it. Have a good junior all.
Clips, clips. And remember, citizens, always subscribe. Hit the notification bell as well. And $19.95 plus shipping and handling will keep you out of hell.